about placement, right? And since we talk about heritage learners, I want to show you a little interview in a minute of someone's speech. Because when we place heritage language learners, one thing, well, there are several questions. One is, we give them a placement test, but do you have a place to place them into? If you don't, then why would you bother? I don't know. But maybe you still want to know to work on your curriculum and such. That's possible. I don't think an interview placement with heritage is very different from a regular placement. But the main thing you want to do is you also want, if someone is literate and they can read and write, fine, they can read and write and you'll see what they're like. If they're not literate, you do need an oral interview. And I would suggest an oral interview, a short interview. 3-5 minutes is enough. Just to see what their language sounds like. That's helpful for you to plan, either to place them if you have a special place for them, or to level for them, or just to decide what you'll do with them. So I would certainly recommend that. But here is someone I just want to show you. It may be kind of curious. This is a student who was my student a couple of years ago. So he immigrated too. He spoke Russian at home. He wanted to join our heritage language class, heritage student class, in the fall and could not. He was a physics major, couldn't do it. So instead, he asked his grandmother to teach him to read and write a little bit. And then he got into the winter quarter of that class. Right? And then at the end of the winter quarter, they each had to read, and this is your incidental learning, They had to choose what they wanted to read. Somehow or other, he chose Dubrovsky. I don't know why. He read it. He loved it. And then he couldn't take the next quarter. He couldn't be there in the spring. So I said, fine, I'll meet with you separately. I didn't teach the class, but I'll meet with you separately. But in return, I'm going to record our meetings. Okay? He said, sure, no problem. So he decided he wanted to read Kapitanskaya Dочка. Not bad for someone who couldn't read 10 weeks ago or 20 weeks ago. 10 weeks ago, basically. All right, so here, if it works, I'll play this, and if it doesn't, I'll show you the transcript. All right, so what we did, he would read a chapter, and then he would come and talk to me, and basically he would narrate the events. Okay? So I said, okay, вторая глава называется «Вожатый», и что в ней было, and he said, там идет интересная история, как они попадают в Буран, and he learned that word from the previous, И они случайно увидели человек, вожатый, который их принес в постоянное... Забыл, как называется, and I said, ну что это? And he said, они там вот ночь были, как гостиница, something, постоялый двор, чтобы переночевать до тех пор, пока погода улучшится, and I said, И когда на следующий день Петр подарил человеку, correct ending, свой пиджак, and it's not пиджак, it's заячий тулупчик, right? It's okay. Свой пиджак, его крестьян, с кем он вместе везде идет, царевич, right? Ему это не очень понравилась идея, но Петр сказал, что ему нужно что-то дать, благодарить его. Вожатый, он был, по-моему, тоже, как похоже, пьяница, и ничего не делал. Это почему сэр его только зовут, а сове зовут почему? Зовут, then he said, по отчеству. All right? I didn't teach him anything. He was reading it, and then he was struggling with talking about it. And I think he learned a lot. He was there. It was very funny, to hear words like Christian. He didn't know the word for peasant, and why would he? He grew up in Los Angeles. We don't have many peasants, and we don't talk about them in Russian in particular, and on and on and on. All right, so there you go. He didn't care about the grade. I didn't care about his grade. He enjoyed it. I loved it. So we had a good time. That's it. All right, just wanted to show you. And he sounds pretty good. You know, his pronunciation is good, so it's extremely funny when he says all that. All right. So now I've been asked to talk about placement tests, and I don't know, Judy, do you want to start or what?
Well, probably not, but, well, I'll just tell you what my position is on placement. Most of us have a single track, a single set of classes into which the heritage speakers and the classroom learners go. And so that when it comes down to placement, the decisions we have to make are pretty few and straightforward. So my sense is, in Spanish, we have the benefit of choice about placement tests. And we use one that is external. It's made by Brigham Young University, and the students take it online. It's multiple choice. It's a very crude, primitive test, but it works. And I guess that's really my message, is that if your placement test puts most of the students in the right course, then it's a good enough placement test. And I would not spend a lot of time making it a perfect placement test, because if it already does the job, then it's already good enough for what you need. Now, having students in the right course when none of the choices of courses is exactly right for them because they're heritage speakers rather than classroom learners, that's a kind of separate issue. And then that becomes a curriculum question for which having some diagnostic information about students will be very helpful. And that's where the research that Olga reported on briefly, and I think yesterday Anna said more, which I unfortunately couldn't understand because it was in Russian, but you did. Then it becomes very helpful to know what students know, what they can do, what their experience is with the language, what uses of the language they make outside of class. So, but those are all answers that are going to feed into the pedagogical and curricular choices that you'll make about how to set the course up, what kinds of activities to do in the class, and having a sense of what the heritage speakers know and can do that is different from what the classroom learners know and can do, and also that's different from each other, because just because somebody's a heritage speaker doesn't mean that there's one single profile. So, you know, all of which is to say, I don't think placement is really our problem. I think our problem happens after the placement.
No, I totally agree. I don't think it's a problem, but I think it helps because it, you know, as I said, it helps you, as Judy said, to know who your students are. You know, if you know a little bit more in advance, that certainly is helpful. I found a way to play that interview for you, so I will do that, and then we'll move on to...
Здесь вот эта вторая глава называется «Вожатый». Да? И что это было?
Вожатый.
В прошлый раз говорили.
Идет интересная история, как они попадают в буран, и они случайно увидели человек, вожатый, кто их принес в постоянное, я же забыл.
Что это было?
Что?
Вроде чего это было?
Чтобы переночевать, до тех пор, как погода улучшится.
Постоялый двор.
Постоялый двор. Спасибо. И когда на следующий день Петр подарил человеку свой пиджак. Его крестьян с кем он вместе везде идет, ему, конечно, понравилась идея, но Петр сказал, что надо ему что-то дать, благодарить его. Вожатый он был, по-моему, тоже, как похоже, был пьяница и ничего не делал. Я почему Его только зовут по Савельича. Да.
Савельич.
Савельич,
Только
да,
зовут
он
по отчиму.
по отчеству. По отчеству.
All right, so here's the question.
И он
You interview a student for your placement, and this is what you get. Well, he won't be talking about капитанская дочка, he'll be talking about his family, right? So what do you do with this? Where do you place this student? He can barely read, okay, at this point. He probably can't write. He could write. We also worked on grammar and such, but you know, he needs to learn how to write. And so you're going to put him into Russian 1, into Russian 2, into Russian 3, into Russian where? Now, what do we do at first? This is the part of a questionnaire we give, but this is only for heritage. So what they see, the first page of the placement tape they see is divided into 2 columns. The one says, if you speak Russian at home, and the other is if you learned Russian, whatever. And then there are 2 different sets of questions. So if you learned Russian at home, these are the questions we ask. So your place of birth, when you came to this country, have you had any instruction in Russian? And very recently I realized that we didn't ask the right question because we omitted home or private tutor, and then we didn't get the whole picture. But now we've added that, so I hope that will help. And then just to know whether they can read and write a little bit, and then whatever information. Then what languages do your parents speak and your grandparents speak, right? And then how much you speak Russian in your daily life, and if you do, who do you speak Russian with, and then rate your own proficiency. That's it. I think the questionnaire needs to be as short as it possibly can. And then by looking at this, I know that, well, this person was born in this country, however, they had a private tutor, however, so we'll see. They still have to do the placement test, but since I also work on the premise that there will be relearning, their placement test doesn't mean that I will place them in the lowest possible. And I also leave some choice to them. Do you think you would want to go here? There was something interesting yesterday when Anna was showing you different interviews. Anna talked to me about, at the beginning of this year, talked to me about a new student who just showed up, who's very good, who's Russian. She was born in this country, but her Russian is amazingly good. And she said, well, it's because she was at home. She has 5 children, 5 siblings or 4 siblings. And I said, are they Russian Orthodox? And Anna said, I don't know. Yes, they are. So that's why her Russian was so good. Her mother stayed home with them. There were 5 siblings. They went to church and so on. So I don't want to ask that, No, I don't need to ask that. But I need to look for that. Because with people who grew up around church, they may have a different vocabulary. So almost the premise is they would go into high-level classes. At the same time, they may be missing some of the, I know that happens in Oregon with Baptists and such, that they have the very high-level biblical vocabulary, but they actually cannot speak about simple things. That's unusual, but you said you have similar situation. So
the church topics sometimes.
Yes, exactly. So there are also local conditions that you need to keep in mind. We have a certain category of students, mostly who are from relatively educated families, a lot of Jewish Russian-speaking families, Armenian Russian-speaking families, and such. So I can't get away with this. I pretty much know what I get. But you need to know what you are looking for, right? So this gives me a first idea of where that student could go, and then they take a placement test if they can read and write. If they can't, it's a short interview. Okay? And if they read and write, we have a regular test that we give to everyone. There is grammar, endings and such. But the most important part is an essay, because it's enough to see how they've written 5 lines, and you know exactly what that person can do, because first of all, you see the handwriting. If someone went to school in Russia, the handwriting is totally different. You need 2 words for that. And then you see the endings, and then you see the simplicity or simple or complex syntax. So basically, that's all you need. But of course, it's a test, so you give more, fine. And they generally, in my experience, if they can read, they do extremely well on reading. I typically don't even grade their reading, because I kind of look at it and say, yes, they've done it. Writing is different.
Do you check reading?
Reading, yeah. Well, okay, the test we gave so far was a pen and paper test, and we had grammar, reading, and writing. We had no listening, and speaking only in some cases when I would talk to people who couldn't write. Because I know that if a heritage learner writes a paragraph, he can say it, or she can say the same. There's no difference. And probably better. So it's not so necessary. But now the college wants us to go to online tests. That was part of the reason you were there in March. Okay. So now next fall, we'll have a Russian online test. And this is what it will have. It will have the grammar. It's multiple choice. That's the nature of the beast. So it will have grammar. It will have reading. It will have listening. It will have then they will have to write by hand. And however it can be submitted, I still can't figure out, because I hoped it can be scanned, and so there are tablets or something. Okay, they'll figure it out. So that will be part of the test. And then they will also have a couple of stimuli where they would have to record themselves. So we'll have a complete assessment then.